A warm welcome to all of you to our Distinguished Speakers series today. And we definitely have a very distinguished speaker joining us, Joseph Teo, who many of us know already from the climate change world. He is Singapore's chief climate change negotiator. Few have his experience in climate change. And also, I have to say, he is also a pioneer as being the co-facilitator of the first ever global stocktake meeting that was held in Doha. I guess time goes, it's been 2-3 years of that. And that was not an easy task. It was absolutely brilliant and successful. And now also heading the Just Transition program. So we're really so privileged and honored to have Joseph Teo taking time from a very, very busy schedule to be with us and talking about climate change. And also our moderator for today, another person not a stranger to climate change, Danielle Yao. She is also an adjunct senior research fellow with CIL. I have to say, Danielle does a lot of things. But she was also very much part of the climate change team for Singapore, and I knew her from that time as well. So may I invite Joseph to make your presentation, and then afterwards, Danielle.
Hi, very good afternoon. I was about to say, I will say a few remarks as we got the slides. I'm Joseph, by no means distinguished at all. I'm just a humble civil servant doing my work for Singapore and for the international community. Glad to have made some contributions in the climate process. So, firstly, I want to thank Nilufer for inviting me to speak in this series of lectures. And thank you also for accommodating my schedule, because I was supposed to speak on the 26th, but I had to fly off to Tokyo on that day, and they kindly rejigged their schedule so that I can speak today. So very sorry for bringing you guys here today just for this lecture. I know it might have been better if I fitted into somewhere on 25th or 26th so that we can have a full spectrum of things. But happy to be here, happy to share with you some of the outcomes from COP30, to give you a preview. So maybe I'll go through the order of my presentation. So I'll just speak a little bit about the COP30 outcomes. Sorry, usually there'll be something here for you to see what I'm presenting. This look here, so it's not that I'm not paying attention to you guys. So I'll go through COP30 outcomes. Of course, I need to do a little bit of spiel as to what Singapore's contributions are. But then maybe give you a preview. It's still early days, but we'll give you a preview of the issues that will come up at COP31, which will be held at Antalya in Turkey. And then identify some emerging trends so you can take forward the discussions over the next 1 or 2 days to proceed with your lectures. And then wrap up with just our general approach as to how we would take climate issues in COP31. So without further ado, we have 1 hour. I have quite a lengthy deck of slides. Try to run through it very quickly so that we'll spend more time in the Q&A. So forgive me if I just skim through the issues. But maybe I'll start with COP31 outcomes. Start off with a very general remark that following back-to-back failures, I mean, at the IPCC, we have some issues about agreement on the schedule of when the reports will be out. And then we have the IMO framework that failed to get an agreement on. So entering into Belém, we were on very shaky grounds, but fortunately, we managed to get an agreement. So that maybe the bar has been set a bit low, but we got an agreement. But more importantly, amidst the US's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, we didn't see the kind of domino effect that was earlier feared. what we did was what we did see was countries coalescing together and agreeing to support the Paris Agreement at the 10th year anniversary, which is very important. So I would characterize Belém as that COP that could go either way, but it went towards supporting multilateralism, notwithstanding the fact that one big player has decided to leave the Paris Agreement at that point in time. So the rest of the countries decided we are going to lend our support to the Paris Agreement. We are going to double down on implementation. Okay, implementation will not fully doing what we're supposed to do, but at least countries agreed they're not going to follow in the US's footsteps, step out of the Paris Agreement, dampen expectations. So I would say that that would be a key deliverable at COP30, kept the rest of the parties staying the course, supporting the Paris Agreement, and supporting its implementation. So that would be one of the key outcomes. The other key outcome is that they agreed to this thing called global multi-round. Now, at a time when there are trade frictions, at a time when countries are, fighting over each other on different issues, a global multi-round that Brazilian embassy reps there. Okay, so now I can get No, but seriously, I think Brazil did a good job in terms of forging the kind of collaboration and cooperation that is needed to address an issue as important as climate change. So they introduced this concept of global multi-round, a Portuguese concept, a Brazilian concept, which is really about trying to get every stakeholder together. Every stakeholder meaning not just governments, but indigenous peoples, NGOs, academics, businesses, all coming together, pooling their effort to see what they can do to move the needle of climate action. And you'll see that in some of the outcomes which I'll elaborate later. And as part of the global multi-round, there is this thing called the Belém political package. I'll elaborate later, but it touches on mitigation, adaptation, trade, gender, and a whole host of issues. So I'll go into the key outcomes. So the first key outcome is it sustain the momentum on climate action and strengthen the focus on implementation. So first key outcome is we got more NDCs. Okay, not all have submitted NDCs, but again, entering into Belém, there were only a few countries. So Singapore, at the start of the year, was only one of 13 countries that submitted NDCs. So entering into Belém is, with the US out, are we going to have everyone in or are we going to have everyone out? What we did see was 122 countries at COP submitting their NDCs. We are getting a slow but steady momentum. We now have 134, not quite 190 yet, but based on our count, it covers about 75% of global emissions. So 75% of global emissions covered by new climate pledges by countries. So I think that is one key takeaway. The problem is that, of course, everyone is widely reported, we're not on track to keeping 1.5 within reach. So Brazil had a big problem at the time. What can I do to show the international community that COP tried to do something about this? So they launched two processes. The first is a Belém 1.5, Mission 1.5, and that is actually a legacy of the GST outcome. At the GST outcome, there was a Mission 1.5. They didn't really take it forward until this COP, where Brazil decided we're going to try to do something about this and try to implement one of the GST outcomes, which was Mission 1.5. The other process that was implemented was the Global Implementation Accelerator. This concept of an accelerator it's focused on getting NDC and National Adaptation Plans implemented. How they want to do it is get an accelerator going. And the concept of the accelerator is again tied to the global multi-round, which is how can we get a discussion going about what are the enabling conditions that can accelerate action on the NDCs and our NEPs. So the jury is still out. I mean, as always, when you can't solve a problem, you form a committee, you form something, you try to talk about it, and hopefully something will come out of it. So in Bellum, at Bellum, we had more NDCs, but the NDCs don't add up. And so there are two processes to try to address this shortfall of the gap in the mitigation. So I'll get to Turkey later, but in COP31 or at COP31, the question is, what would these two processes lead to? And that is a question mark, and that is our work for the year ahead. And then that's not enough. We still need to get 1.5. Two big mitigation abatement options are, of course, fossil fuel transition and deforestation. So these were identified as the two. And again, both of these issues were part of the GST again. So you will see that the imprint of the GST is making its impact felt in the years again. So unfortunately, there was no consensus to start a roadmap on both of these issues within the UNFCCC process. So what the COP president did was announce that he will take it under his own authority to launch processes to develop roadmaps to transition away from fossil fuels. No timeline, but on deforestation, as part of the GST outcome is to halt and reverse deforestation by 2030. So again, watch this space. Maybe next year, if I'm invited again and I'm free, I can come back to report on you. Did we achieve something or did we not? But I will come to that a little bit later on the prospects, because not all it will be smooth sailing, and I don't want to put wool over your eyes to say all is hunky-dory, and just because we have these processes, everything will be solved. It's a long challenge ahead. Different parties have different issues, and we're going to have a lot. I'm sorry, I'm going on too on. The third, of course, is we agree on. So some of the modalities, there were a lot of disagreements as to we have the GST, how to implement it, how not to. Different parties felt maybe we should focus on this, maybe we should focus on that. At COP, they agreed. At Bellum, they agreed. Okay, let's put aside our difference. Let's look at the UAE, the GST dialogue as a whole. Let's talk about its implementation, and they agreed to launch the dialogue. Number two, they decided to have one last GST dialogue. For those who are not familiar, GST dialogue is focused on getting your NDCs to be tabled, and to be tabled in a way that is informed by the GST outcome. So the dialogue is supposed to have an exchange of best practices as to how different countries have considered the GST outcome in their next NDC. So the dialogue was supposed to do that. They had two earlier dialogues, and the last and final one will be held in June this year. And the idea is being that we are finishing up the GST 1. GST 2 will be in 2028, which is in 2 years' time, and the technical process to talk about where we are, where we need to be, will begin in earnest in June and COP31 this year as they tee up the process as to how to get the next GST 2 discussed. So these are the first outcome. Second outcome, very quickly, is we agreed on Article 6. Article 6 is carbon markets. Article 6 rules were finalized at COP29 under Minister Grace Fu, Singapore's Minister for Environment and Climate and Sustainability, together with the New Zealand Climate Minister. We got the deal done. This year, it was about working out some of the implementation details. I won't go into the technical detail, but just to show there was progress on Article 6. Third, and very importantly, I think this is one of the highlights for COP, there was strengthened support for adaptation action and support. And these are the key outcomes. The first of which is the adoption of the 59 indicators, which was contested, but in the end, the COP presidency maintained that it has been adopted. And this set of indicators are meant to try to galvanize, or try to track progress on the the 59 indicators and the themes and the key areas: food, water, cultural heritage, etc., ecosystems, health. So those were the broad themes, and the indicators are meant to see, we try to track progress. So we got 59 indicators adopted. We have a vision that will take us to the Ethiopian COP, which will be the COP next year. And the idea then is to use these 2 years to try to improve the reporting methodologies so that countries will be in a better position to report on these indicators by the time they hit Ethiopian COP. And then we have what we call a Baku adaptation roadmap. That is really about another dialogue that is meant to bring parties together, again in a global multi-round. So parties, not only just parties, but different stakeholders to come together to see how they can strengthen implementation of the indicators and strengthen implementation for adaptation on action as well as for support, which is finance. And then there was a call contested also, a very difficult decision about tripling of adaptation finance. Initially, the proposal was to triple adaptation finance by 2030. They settled on 2035, which is in line with the NCQG, new collective quantified goal on climate finance. For those who don't know what I must try to watch my acronyms. So it's the new climate finance goals. It's aligned with that. Developing countries wanted 2030 to replace the 2025 doubling of adaptation goal. So there was previously an agreement to double adaptation finance 40 billion by 2025. The date has lapsed, so at Pelham there was a debate about what is this new goal to replace that goal. They wanted to, developing countries push for 2030, but in the end we got 2035. There is no baseline, so that's another big issue. How do you measure from when and how much? And how are you tripling adaptation finance? So really tricky, but the signal is meant to be given to the international community that more adaptation finance will be forthcoming in the years ahead, and we need to double down on this very important area. And then, of course, there were some new pledges to the adaptation fund, which is meant to funnel climate finance towards adaptation. Fund for responding to loss and damage. But it wasn't a big decision at COP. It was a lot of heavy lifting was done by the board itself. The key point really is that we've had this fund established at COP28. There were a lot of pledges, but in Pelham, the decision is we're going to earmark 250 million for the first tranche of early disbursement for projects. And the call has been open to developing countries to submit their project proposals, 5 to 20 million. So the idea is that by COP31, maybe we will have one disbursement or a couple of disbursement of funds to help vulnerable developing countries deal with some of this. So that is the key highlight. There's also a review, but I mean these are technical details about the Warsaw Internet. I won't go into it. It's about how to improve the structures within the UNFCCC to strengthen our parties' preparation for loss and damage. Next, climate finance. We have the new collective goal, quantified goal of climate finance to 300 billion, ramping up to 1.3 trillion by 2035, done and settled in COP29 the year before. There was a report that was issued by the COP29 and COP30, Azerbaijan and Brazil. It's there, Google it if you want more details. I forgot to include the QR code. But that report basically lists out a whole range of ways for countries, for parties, for stakeholders to try to ramp up climate finance. Again, I won't go into a lot of details, but things like carbon markets, things like blended finance, innovative sources of finance are all put into the report as to try to guide different stakeholders to see how they can move from 300 billion to 1.3 trillion. Of course, I touched on the tripling of adaptation finance already, so I won't go into that in much detail. At Vellum, there was a big debate over the provision of climate finance. So I emphasize the word provision because for those of you who follow this in more detail, Article 9.1 puts an obligation on certain parties to provide climate finance. Article 9.3 talks about mobilizing climate finance from different sources. At Vellum, India and some other countries developing felt that, well, the collective goal on climate finance talked a lot about mobilizing finance, which is great. I want to know how much public finance there is available that can be used to catalyze that 1.3. It was a touchy subject, contested, and in the end, what they agreed was to have a 2-year work program to touch on climate finance in general, and then including on Article 9.1. So this is, again, your negotiating outcome where when you have different views, you talk about Article 9 in general, which is about everyone trying to do their part on climate, with, it's not even particular, it's including Article 9.1. So it's supposed to give that semblance of flavor that provision of finance will be the focus, but everything under Article 9 will be discussed. Then there are another two, the other side of the coin, which is pushed by developed countries, is this concept of Article 2.1c, which is about aligning all climate flows with low carbon, climate resilient development. What that means is we're not looking only at public sources of finance, we're looking at all sources of finance, and that is also a touchy subject for some fossil fuel producing states because it's looking at ways to starve off finance in areas that are not aligned with the low carbon climate resilient development. So that has been contested. So there was a big debate as to whether to continue the dialogue on Article 2.1c or not. So many developing countries wanted to kill that debate. In the end, there was a decision to extend that debate for 3 years. So I just want to point out that this is part of the compromise. So developing countries wanted provision, developed countries wanted to talk about all the finance. In the end, they got both, and in a very fudged way so that it can accommodate the interests of every party. And of course, there's a high-level ministerial roundtable to focus on provision, but there was no date as to when this ministerial roundtable will be held. So watch that space again. There was a decision to have a roundtable, no decision when. So all these terms, Veradas, Dialogue, Zingu, they're all focused on 2.1c. They are resilient Portuguese names just to remain what they are. But a whole series of dialogues talk about climate finance in the years ahead. I've still got lots to cover, so I think I'm going to speed up now. Okay, so they launched new processes, so I'm very proud on the first one, because at COP29 again, we did not reach agreement on a just transition outcome, but fortunately, with the support of all parties, my co-chair and I, Italy and myself, Singapore, we managed to have an agreement on the just transition. And one of its key outcomes is to develop a just transition mechanism to support developing countries to make that transition in a just, orderly, fair manner. So there was a decision to develop. COP31 will then decide on the terms of reference of what this mechanism will do exactly, and etc. So Anatalia has his work cut out for itself. Then there is another important thing, Vellum Technology Implementation Program. Again, this is an issue which is very important to developing countries. Again, it was very contested. Many developed countries say there's enough institutions within the UNFCCC, we don't need another one. In the end, we got an agreement to launch a 9-year technology implementation program. Hopefully, this will be one of the enablers or accelerators to get NDCs to move faster. And then, of course, important to many constituencies is the climate action. Again, the action plan was adopted last year, but again, they agreed on this. It identifies a whole range of areas where different parties, different stakeholders are meant to start to step up action in terms of getting women participation, getting the voice of women in the climate processes. Also very important. And then lastly, of course, we had oceans dialogue before, and now we have mountains dialogue, but not a full dialogue. The dialogue is to decide, again, at this year, whether we are going to have oceans dialogue, kind of the annual dialogues in the form of the oceans dialogue. So not a half step, but again, very contested because many other countries felt we're just having too many issues to be have to proceed. Another important, significant outcome is amidst concerns about unilateral measures, green barriers, there was a decision to have a dialogue to discuss climate and trade. So this climate and trade dialogue will take place in June, not at COPs. But I suspect and anticipate that the dialogues that we have in June, there will be a discussion at COP because there are different countries who feel this issue is very important to them. So again, climate and trade will be high on the agenda. And of course, there were very contested visions about what this dialogue will do and whether trade, whether climate-related measures are permissible or not. In the end, they moved back to Article 3.5 of the Convention and replicated that those, as it's in my slide here. So that was an outcome, a reiteration of Article 3.5, and then to start a dialogue. So this process will then lead to greater discussions about the nexus between the two. And so CBAM will naturally be an issue that will be raised on one side. Critical minerals, of course, also may be raised on the other side. So it's an interesting issue. But at the same time, the WTO is also having that discussion. So this ping-pong game will continue in the years ahead. And then outside of the negotiating process, of course, there is an action agenda which every COP presidency tries to push. Brazil have done its part. Its signature outcome is the Tropical Forest Forever Facility, 5.5 billion. It's a novel way of, again, galvanizing climate finance. I won't go into the details on its operational aspects, but the point really is to try to use this facility to curb deforestation, particularly in the Amazon area. And then there's a whole host of course, pledges that the COP presidency and others have tried to push, and they are listed on my slide. I won't go into details. Singapore's contributions, again, I'll go through it very quickly. One, we of course supported at that very crucial time when multilateral framework of cooperation was being contested. We felt as a small city-state, it is important for Singapore to support this system, and we did so very early by submitting our NDC, one of 13 to do so, to try to get that momentum going. Pleased to note that 120 had submitted in COP, and then now 134. We hope that momentum will continue going into COP31. In our national statement, again, we wanted to lend our support to calls for every COP to be an implementation COP. So again, in our national statement, you can Google it, it's on the web page. We outline many ways as to how Singapore is making that contribution, implementing decisions that were adopted at COP in various ways. And then, okay, I already touched on this, so I won't belabor this point, but some of our Singapore delegation members played a role to support the COP presidency to deliver outcomes. Brazil attached very strong importance to the just transition, so I managed to deliver something for them, and we're very pleased with that. Diane, who among some of you may know, also co-facilitated one of the tracks and led to a successful outcome. Then, of course, Singapore supported some of the action agenda initiatives listed on the slides. Next, back to implementation again. At every COP, we at COP28, we announced we're doing this fast speed. Every COP we come back and we show progress. We showed that now we have commitment of $510 million ready to deploy capital to support regional decarbonization. So we announced, MAS announced this at our COP. Next, we have the traction report. You can take a slide of the QR code, you can read the report. It's really about trying to use transition credits to try to support decarbonization in the region. Next, our COP Pavilion has been a huge draw, and it had 8,000 people, but the fact remains is that we are using our pavilion to galvanize partnerships, action, and to deliver and to show each COP that we are implementing things on the ground that's making a difference. Again, scan the QR code if you want more details. I won't go into them. Details. Then, of course, we advance our carbon market interests. We sign MOUs. We sign implementation agreements. The important MOU that we signed was in Brazil. So Brazil is a huge country, lots of carbon credits potential. We managed to get a deal done. Not quite an implementation agreement, but at least Brazil has agreed to work with us. And only two countries, Switzerland and Singapore. So we are proud to be two countries so far. We have signed an MOU with Brazil to work on Article 6 aligned carbon credits. And then we, of course, we did others with Thailand and others. Important thing to note also is maybe the last bullet point about this coalition to grow carbon markets. So like I'll come into that about the processes ahead. But what we are trying to do now is trying to get like-minded countries coming together to shore up the Article 6 carbon markets at a time where the use of carbon credits itself is being scrutinized more negatively. And we are trying in our own little way to show positive use cases of how Article 6 aligned carbon credits can help drive ambition and yet maintain high standards of environmental integrity. So I think that is what I want to highlight. And of course, busy period at COP, we network, we get to meet bilateral partners to see how we can work together to raise climate action. Very important, at every COP, Singapore brings along a youth delegation. We scaled down this year, we usually bring 20. This year we had 10 because Brazil, we had challenges of accommodation and others. But again, if you are interested, we don't sanction or we don't edit their reports. We bring the youth over, they help to curate different programs at our pavilion. They network with other players, other youths, and they came out with their own report to say what they will do in the years ahead. So just scan that and you'll see some of the interesting ideas and proposals that they have made by themselves, following their experience at Pelham. And very interesting thing, my minister didn't co-facilitate in Pelham this year. She was asked, but she preferred to bring the youth to this island called Pombu to show our youth the lived experience of indigenous and what Brazil is like, the challenges they face, and she personally led this youth there on an expedition to engage them. And I thought that is a quite important aspect. So the idea is that we just don't attend COPs, stuck in the negotiating rooms. Our minister brought the youth into the Brazilian Amazon forest, show what life of the indigenous people there like, the challenges they face, and then hopefully they come back and they realize that Singapore, maybe we are a bit sheltered, maybe we have a different set of challenges, but the idea is really to broaden their perspective that different countries have different challenges. And this is a nutshell of the COP Pavilion outcomes. So very quickly, preview of COP31. So the first challenge is that there will be challenging geopolitical conditions will remain. That's an understatement. This year, we have an unprecedented arrangement where there will be two COP presidents, one COP president, Turkey, but there will be a president negotiations. from Australia who will be leading the negotiations aspect. So it remains to be seen how effective this partnership is. But needless to say, Singapore will be engaging both of them and will be supporting them as best as we can to see how COP31 can build on the outcomes of previous COP and maintain the momentum of global climate action. Obviously, US's withdrawal will be a big cloud looming over the process. Then there's also the issue if the US is out, who can step in? And that remains a question mark. The EU now currently have its own challenges. Who can fill this position? So that remains to be seen. And then, of course, climate ambition is expected to remain a key priority. I told you 134. I think the objective is to try to get more NDCs in. And then, of course, just getting NDCs in is not enough. We need to figure out these processes that we have created. Can they contribute? Can they move the needle further? And again, COP President Anatalia will have to decide on that. And then, of course, there's the two roadmaps of deforestation and fossil fuel transition, which will be presented by the Brazilian COP presidency to Turkey. And then parties will have to decide, this remains outside, or can we take some of the ideas in? Again, this will depend a lot on the deep leadership skills of the Australian president's negotiations, as well as the Turkish president, as to how they can try to get some of this outcome or show that there's some movements. But it's going to be very challenging because fossil fuel producing states obviously will feel that this is something that should remain outside of the process because there's no consensus. Preparation for second GST will start in earnest. I already mentioned. Climate transparency is very important because this COP will be when the second biennial transparency reports are due. So we already had the first biennial transparency report in Azerbaijan, COP. Now is the second biennial, so we need to get the same quorum of countries submitting their biennial transparency reports, because really these biennial transparency reports are the inventory reports, and they will show whether an emperor is without its clothes or not, because it will show that we will have two reports now. You can virtually draw a line. Of course, we can wait for the third report, then you have three dots, and then you can draw a line as to whether they are meeting on track to meet their climate pledges, off track or not. So these reports are very important. You can bet on Singapore working with Turkey to encourage them to meet that Antalya transparency COP of accountability. Finance, many dialogues have been established. The needs of developing countries are great, so this issue is not going to run away. How we finesse, how we address this at Antalya will be another key challenge. Technical work on adaptation is not going to be so a big deliverable at this COP. It's supposed to just sustain the momentum. The big deliverable will be the COP later, Ethiopia, when the vision is supposed to be adopted. So adaptation outcomes will be a key deliverable for Ethiopian COP, not so much the Antalya COP. But Antalya COP needs to maintain the momentum of the technical work leading up to the finalization of the vision in Ethiopia the following year. And then we have the just transition mechanism. So we have an agreement to develop one. Can we have an agreement to, on its terms of reference, what it does, what it doesn't, what is off, what is OB markers? It's going to be very contested. Making progress on, I mentioned this already, the Fund for Response to Damage. Hopefully there'll be one or two early disbursements to show that some vulnerable developing countries is benefiting concretely from this fund that was established a couple of years ago. And then climate and trade will be there. How, in what form it will appear in the COP decision, we'll see. Some will argue we have already established the dialogue. Let's wait for the dialogues to finish, and then we will reach an agreement. Others will say, oh, this is a pressing issue, we still need some proclamation at COP, so we'll see. And then follow up on Article 6, can we get a first set of Article 6.4 projects through the Article 6 the Sustainable Development Mechanism remains to be seen. Emerging trends, in view of the consensus decision-making process within COP, the COP30 president has already alluded to this two-tier multilateralism. So those who can move faster, we move faster. Those who can't, we move back. So what we can agree in UNFCCC, we'll try and agree, but that shouldn't stop action among those who want to go faster. So there is a coalition to phase out fossil fuels. So there is a ministerial meeting that will be held in Colombia in April. So that ministerial meeting will try to move them to see if like-minded countries can agree on some steps to transition away from fossil fuels. And then bring that to the COP, and if COP can't agree, all parties can't agree, then maybe this group of countries can proceed first. So that's one. There is the Global Solidarity Levy Task Force that has also been created. Those who wanted to apply aviation levy, France, Kenya, etc., please do so. Those who feel that that's not the right way, maybe not. Singapore pushing the coalition to grow carbon markets. Those who are willing to use carbon markets, can we move forward to do it? So that two-tier system is probably the way ahead, at least for the next 2 or 3 years. Greater focus on implementation, very important point, because there is the ICJ advisory opinion that is out. There is the second biennial transparency reports that are out also. Will we, or will you, or will the international community hold parties, hold companies accountable to their pledges? Again, we have seen some litigation cases already. Are we going to see an uptick or not? Again, the jury is out, but ICJ came in with very strong recommendations on fossil fuel, on state parties' obligations. So I guess you guys in that space, you know more about it. Issue of fossil fuel phase out will remain high, not only because there's a coalition pushing for it. Of course, the ICJ advisory opinion also came on very strongly on what fossil fuel, or what states can or should not do. Consumption and production was mentioned in the ICJ advisory opinion. So this will be high on the agenda. Again, in a more practical case, the COP presidency had to present his own report in COP31. So it's up to parties how to take forward the report or not. And then, of course, delivery of climate finance will continue. The search for innovative sources of finance to support. Money is tight around. Public finance is not going to be easy to come by. Can we think of new innovative ways to galvanize? So the tropical fund for TFFF, I forget what's the acronym, is one model. Will there be more models that will come up to galvanize climate finance? And then the trade and climate nexus will remain a big political issue, I think, at each COP, because it raises the cost. Green barriers arguably raises the cost of the energy transition for some parties. It diverts funds from some parts of the world to another part of the world. So a bit contested, but at the same time, some recognize that this is the way to raise ambition. So should the WTO deal with this? Should the UNFCCC deal with this? Should ANSI trial deal with this? So these are all, should investors take this dispute? So there are a whole range of issues that will be discussed. So very quickly now, I'm sorry I took 45 minutes. Singapore's approach at COP, very easy, just 3 things. I think we will continue to support multilateralism. And more importantly, we show it by action. So we will show that Singapore is continuing to implement, and we took the very important decision to raise our carbon tax this year, notwithstanding the feeling that others are falling behind. We have decided to push ahead, $45 already, one of the highest in the region. Support global regional climate action, so that is something we will continue to do. Internationally, UNFCCC, to see how we can support the process. Regionally, through our FASP and others, we will see how we can nudge the region to go faster in various forms. And of course, we will engage on various solutions. So the grids, ASEAN grid is one big piece of the jigsaw that we feel will be a big enabler and accelerator. Global economy agreements, we are starting new, so we have FTAs, we are now using FTAs to talk about certification standards, talk about new ways to deal with a carbon constrained world, to try to galvanize climate action. MOUs on carbon credits, coalition to grow, are all ways where we are trying to build support for the Article 6 carbon credits. And then of course, low carbon solutions, geothermal, SMRs, hydrogen, CCS, carbon dioxide removal. For Singapore, and we are not going to leave any stone unturned. As a country that very little renewable energy resource ourselves, we need to look at all the various options to help us make that transition. So with that, I thank you and I apologize for taking more than I took.